So, hello, Alex, and welcome to Word on the Street. I'm really excited to have you here today. I feel like I'm going back in time because I used to, in fact, the biggest part of my job at one point, we were creating loads of really good inbound leads because, of course, our marketing was perfect because I was running it. And I used to spend pretty much 90% of my day job running bids and responding to RFPs and pitches. So I feel like I'm in a time warp. I'm going to be taken back to when I used to do this a lot more. So yeah, welcome to Word on the Street. And I'm super excited to hear more about you today.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate you inviting me to come along and talk to you.
So what I want to start with, which I always feel is a very good place to start, is for my lovely listeners and me to learn a little bit more about you and how you got to being the bid specialist that you are today.
Yeah, so 20 odd years spent in a variety of marketing and communications and business development roles, working client side as opposed to working within agencies. But you know, naturally, as part of my role, I've worked with lots and lots of agencies of all kinds over those years. Worked across a range of different sectors, but a big chunk of my career was spent in financial and professional services. So worked for some of the big banks, AIM-listed law firms, and spent a bit of time in manufacturing and the public sector as well. And you know, I guess always enjoyed working in creative roles and being creative from a young age, and I suppose that kind of naturally took me into the realm of marketing, but also enjoyed the kind of commercial aspect of working in businesses and being, I guess, responsible in part for helping drive the growth of those businesses and winning new work. And yeah, I always had that kind of desire to run my own business. And for about the last 5 or 6 years, it's something that I was seriously considering, and various things got in the way, not least a global pandemic. And yeah, got the other side of kind of the lockdown, and with a friend of mine decided that we would make the leap and start our own consultancy and launch Stephen Alexander earlier this year.
Brilliant. And what a great business you now have. So really your role is helping agencies secure more work via bidding.
Yeah, that's you've got absolutely right, Katie. It's so what we essentially do is we run the bid program for bid programs for lots of different agencies. We offer essentially an end-to-end service across public and private sector bidding and pitching and tendering. You know, for some of our clients, that means that we are monitoring the opportunities that come to market based on what requirements they have. We'll then look at deconstructing, you know, what that opportunity looks like, what the contract looks like, and then essentially writing the entire submission end to end. The only thing we don't look after is pricing. So our clients will naturally price a bid or tender or proposal, but pretty much all of the parts of the process we look after. We do have some clients that come to us that may want us to pick up specific parts of the process, but 9 times out of 10, we run the process end to end, really. Yeah.
And does that mean that you're, Alex, having the conversation? Are you leading the conversations with the potential new client? So how does that side of things work?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In most processes, certainly in public sector bidding, the only interaction you'll have with the awarding authority or the potential client organisation tends to be via the portal or system that's used to submit the bid. So there's very little by way of interaction. We do work on bids, and we have worked on bids with clients where there will be some element of scoping or briefing sessions, and we may engage in that process. We may go along to those sessions with our client, with the agency. But certainly in public sector processes, it's done really at arm's length. And that's just to ensure there's that kind of impartiality. So You're not. It will be slightly different to, if you compare that traditional RFP process where they're probably having a fair bit of interaction with a client. Certainly in public sector bidding, you don't get that. Which makes for an interesting challenge, really, because the bidder's really got to sell you as an agency. It's got to work even harder, I guess, is the point.
Yeah, and that is, it's a real challenge for agencies. So I guess that's my first deep question is, why is this something that they should look at? Because it does feel scary when you're going in, you're faceless, you're not able to build that relationship, you're not able to engage, you're not able to ask all the questions, you're all of the, 101 major things that we have been taught to do that we know are important to do, often in these kind of closed bidding sectors, and I used to do a lot of them for the agencies that I used to work for. We were the biggest supplier on G-Cloud for government tenders in the marketing agency space or digital agency space at the time. So I know what this is like, but why it feels risky. Why should agencies take that risk to kind of play in this space?
I suppose maybe the obvious answer to that is, or maybe not so obvious, there are some really, really interesting and profitable opportunities out there. That's the first, from a commercial perspective. And it's not, look, this isn't for everybody, and there will be agencies, and I'm sure there will be some of your listeners that that really, as part of their own strategy, really focus on public sector work. We work with some agencies and we've written their very first bid. And I think some of it is around kind of just diversification. I don't want to talk about, I'm not going to use the dreaded R word, but it's tough out there at the moment, and so I guess from a diversification perspective, in terms of just being aware of the opportunities that are out there, and there's I guess there's maybe a little bit of a stigma attached still to public sector work, and maybe there's some agencies out there that think, do you know what, it's all kind of, it's stuck in the past and it's stuff that we would have probably done 20 years ago. And I would challenge that perception. I think the quality of, because we see this every day, we track opportunities. It's going to sound very boring, but literally our first job every morning, myself and my business partner, the first job we do is we scan what opportunities are coming to market. So we see a lot of this stuff, and there's some really, really interesting, challenging, exciting projects and contracts out there. You've got some really big, we've done a couple of fairly chunky bids on digital transformation projects in the social housing sector, where they're really trying to drive the delivery of services through digital channels. They're really trying to get to grips with that now and making, and investing some serious budget into it. So from a commercial perspective, for agencies that maybe haven't considered it or maybe have been put off for whatever reason, in terms of diversifying the types of clients they've got, and just from the perspective of the types of work that are out there, there's some really interesting and profitable opportunities.
But it's risky. I'm playing devil's advocate here, because you've got to put so much time in and you're going at it blind. So how do you remove some of that risk, and how can we, I guess, give confidence to people to take that risk, to go for this? I mean, I guess one thing is potentially lots of people, worry about the points that we've just been talking about. Therefore, they don't go for them, and therefore hopefully it's slightly less competitive than an open private sector bid, maybe, where you've got a bit more of a ability to build relationships. So what can we do to convince our lovely listeners that it's worth investing the time here?
Well, I think, look, if in terms of removing the risk, there are lots of things agencies can do to make sure. We talk a lot about being bid ready. So if you're going to make a commitment to doing this, my advice would be, don't do it. Don't be half-hearted about it. So if you've not bid for work before, and you're considering it, then you are going to need to make an investment. So there's no two ways about it. There's no point in dipping your toe into this and thinking, do you know what, I'll give that bid a go, because there are certain things you will need. And again, not wanting to lean it towards public sector, but there are certainly things that you will have to have in place in order to get through some of the mandatory requirements. And we can touch on those in a moment. So my first bit of advice would be, this has to be a strategic decision. It has to be if you've not bid for public sector work or not bid for work in the past, because there will be things you'll need to put in place. So that's important. And by making that decision and that investment, there is no reason why you can't put yourself in the best possible place to win that work. I think that there's some other points to consider. I guess fairly obvious. Put a plan in place and go for the work where you're strong. You've got credentials in that space, and that will be no different to when you're pitching for a work that's not come through a competitive tendering process. It's just maybe a more informal pitch or an RFP process. Some of the same principles that you'll apply to that process won't be any different to bidding. Don't go for a project where you haven't really got the credentials or the capabilities to put forward the strongest case possible. So, some of those things are fairly sensible. In terms of, I guess, what do you need to put yourselves in that best possible position to win a bid? We talk a lot about being bid ready. And what we mean by that is there are a number of things that and this should be hopefully helpful for your listeners. A number of things that are a must-have. The first one is around policies and procedures. So for example, if you're going into a bid process, you're almost certainly going to be asked for things like your health and safety policy, your diversity and inclusivity policy, your environmental policy, data protection. And, for some of the bigger, more established agencies out there, maybe that's just a given. Maybe there are some bigger players that, again, maybe they haven't looked at this stuff for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's something they just don't look at regularly. But it's important to have those things in place, because in many bids you will be asked for evidence of those policies. So that's the first thing that we talk to agencies about when we go through this process. The second thing is financial information. So in pretty much all bid processes, again, you'll be asked to provide details of your accounts, your what they'll normally phrase it as financial and economic standing. And so you'll be asked for copies of to provide copies of accounts, and also other information around some processes require you to have certain levels of liquidity ratios and what have you. So there are some requirements there. So it's important, if you're going to go into a bid process, that you've got that information, ready and to hand. The other one to consider is accreditations. And again, this will be fairly similar to your kind of pitch and RFP processes. And they're not always mandatory, but they're certainly things that will help set an agency apart. So, for example, ISO 9001, 14001. There are lots of accreditations out there around quality, environmental, data security. Then, as I say, they're not always mandatory, but they're the types of things that will help set an agency apart. So again, coming back to your question, how do you? I suppose it's not necessarily about de-risking. It's about if you're making that decision to go and bid for work, how do you get yourself in the best possible position to secure the contract? And so these are things that we always advise our clients to consider. There may be other accreditations within, whether you're a PR agency or a digital agency, or you lean towards one or the other. There are other accreditations that you can talk about, but they're things that we would always, encourage agencies. Certainly, if we're talking to agencies who are taking that first step into bidding for work, we will often go through an exercise to do a bit of a gap analysis and say, well, okay, before you get into this process, and we know you want to bid for that contract and you're really excited about the opportunity, but have you got these things in place? Because the worst case scenario is you get into a bid and you're then having to pull together policies and documents, and you don't want to be in that position, because that's ultimately going to put you on the back foot.
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, gosh, you really are taking me back here, Alex. We were so successful on G Cloud, and we won the most digital I think, work through G Cloud than any other agency for about a year or two. We were told specifically by G Cloud, actually. This is going way back. I'm talking nearly probably 10 years ago. And that was because we had all the ISOs. We were consistently audited. We had the fantastic case studies. We'd been working with, some of the biggest government organizations for many, many years. So we had all of that in play. We were a profitable agency. So when we were submitting the last 3 years, financial reports, they all looked good. So that really, really helps. If you don't have those things, personally, when it comes to public sector bidding, I wouldn't even start. And then there's quite a bit of work to do, isn't there, Alex, just to get yourself on those portals. So remind me, I'm talking about G Cloud, which I don't even know if that, I know it is still a thing, but it'll probably be on version 511 or something now. I remember it was like G Cloud 6 is coming, G Cloud 7 is coming. So where do people go to find these bids, and what do they need to do to get, to get on the list, basically?
Well, so there's a couple of things there. It's probably worth me just giving a quick rundown of the different types of opportunities from a contractual perspective. So you've got, and some of your listeners will be familiar with these terms, you've got, a straightforward kind of measured term contract. You might see this sometimes abbreviated to MTC. That's one contract that is being, has come to market, which will be awarded to one supplier. You've then got frameworks, and they'll operate in a very similar way to other panels, panels in the private sector world that some of your listeners will be, pitching to get on. Framework operates in a very similar way. There is a process to bid to get onto the framework. And you've mentioned one already. And once if you're successful and you're on that framework, then it's a case of there's normally a much shorter process then to bid for the work as it is released by the awarding authority or the client. You've then got something called a dynamic purchasing system, DPS, which very similar to a framework. So those are there are different types of opportunities, I guess, is the first thing. In terms of how do you get onto them, there's some really, really simple ways to review this stuff. The government website Contract Finder is free to use because all public sector, certainly public sector bids, have to be published in the public domain. So they have to be anything that's funded through public money has to be published in the public domain. So really simply, it's free to use. An agency can go onto Contract Finder, set themselves up at no cost. There are a ton of other alert services out there, and obviously, I'm not going to be so biased to kind of mention one of them and plug them, but there are tons of them out there, and they tend to be paid services. And what a lot of those alerts or data feeds will do is you can go into much more detail in terms of the types of opportunities you're interested in. And again, lots of your listeners, I'm sure, will probably be on some of these and have registered to some of these systems. And the money is, it's not huge. You're probably talking, less than 100 or a couple of £100 a month to get yourself onto these databases, and then they will send through the opportunities. We work with some clients where we take that process on for them, and purely because we find with some of our agency clients, even when they've subscribed to this stuff, they don't have the time to review it, because you've then got to go onto the system, you've got to register interest, you've got to download the documentation. Again, that process itself, and you talked about risk earlier, time is an issue, isn't it? Time is an issue. And if you're trying to de-risk something, how do you do that? Well, it's about, can I invest the time at the front end of the process to actually understand what the opportunity looks like? And, not wanting to make this a sales pitch, but that's part of what we do as a business. We help agencies kind of understand what that looks like. So you've got the different types of opportunities, and then there are lots of different, ways of then, I guess, getting yourself onto these databases so you know what's coming to market. But my view would be, certainly if you're starting out and you're just starting to look at this, go to the Contract Finder website, do a few searches on there, and you'll be able to see quite quickly what types of opportunities are currently in the market.
Hey guys, just interrupting very quickly because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you about Tamba. If you're enjoying today's podcast, I know you are going to love the Tamba platform. Tamba is full of all the insights, hints, tips, and fantastic content and training and templates and events that you need to enable you to attract and win more new clients yourselves. If you enjoy the podcast, it's this kind of content that you'll be able to see, get more of, save to your profile, work through training programs with some of my fantastic guests actually. So if you haven't checked it out already, please do www.tamba.io. That's www.tamba.io. Go have a look. I hope you love it, and I hope to see you at some of our online events very, very soon. Amazing. And I'm going to be cheeky because, I always want to find out the hidden information. What are the platforms that you love or that you know of that people can sign up to get the alerts that you mentioned? What are there a couple of your favorite that you think are good for people to go and check out?
Yeah, I mean, you've got, so you can go to the way that it works. Some of these platforms will be a destination for government agencies, other institutions to kind of publish the bids. So you've got the likes of Proactis, and you can go in and you can sign up. Some of these, not all of them are paid for. So you can go on to Proactis, Intend. You've got B2B Quote. So B2B Quote, I think, is one of the paid for services. As I say, Proactis and Intend are big portals. And again, they'll all have paid for and free. It's like anything these days, isn't it? You've got that kind of entry point where you can go in and you can register for stuff for free, and it'll give you a certain level of information. And then if you want to kind of take the jump up to receive, maybe slightly more sophisticated, detailed information, then you have to pay for it. So there's a few there for clients to think about.
Brilliant. I love it. See, there we go. Those are the ones to check out, guys. Go and have a look. So say we've got someone listening, let's hope, that is interested in starting to do more of these, bids in general, not necessarily public sector, but bids across the board. It's not something that they've done lots of, but they feel like it's going to be a good investment of their time. Where, obviously, looking at the platforms and all that kind of stuff, where do they start in terms of structuring an actual bid response?
So I'm going to take it, if you don't mind, Katie, I'm going to take it a step before the bid response, because I think there's something that's really important for agencies to think about. And again, this is coming back a little bit to your question about de-risking, how they tackle this, is come up with a bid plan. Because it's really, really tempting, because you see stuff out there and you think that's really exciting. It's a great opportunity. That would represent probably our biggest win of the year. It's really tempting to dive straight in. What we talk to our clients about across the agency world is come up with a plan. So some really basic stuff. So do you know what's profitable in terms of work that you win? So what level would the contract, in terms of the opportunity, in terms of monetary value, have to be in order for it to be profitable for you? And so, if you understand that, the chances are you're going to choose the right opportunities. That's the first thing to think about. The second thing is what types of work. So within your bid strategy, what types of work do you want to win? So strategically, you might be a full service agency, but actually you're not really interested in winning kind of comms work. You want to go after some more kind of campaign type stuff. Thinking about those types of work, being as specific as you can about that. Where in the world do you want to win work? And there are contracts that are published here in the UK. They're actually, international. It's international work. It's work that's not just here in the UK, it's overseas as well. But the vast majority obviously would be UK centric. It's thinking about from a location perspective, where do you want, where are you strong? Do you only want to go for stuff that's local to you because you want to play on that whole, run agency that understand the local economy, for example? And then, I guess, by looking at those things and having a plan in place, types of work, the value, the location, the type, and public sector is broad as well. Some people think of public sector and they probably think of their local council. That's it, or or Westminster, but it's really, really broad. You know, we've done bids for consortiums of universities coming together to launch new research facilities, and you know, you've got healthcare in there, you've got kind of government support agencies. There is a really, really broad range of stuff in the public sector, and I think that thinking about the types of clients you want to work with, you know, for example, have you just started to grow your agency in one particular area and you think, actually, we've got some really strong case studies around healthcare that would translate well into a bidding process? I think once you've got that in place, you've got a solid foundation then to help you filter what's out there in the market. So sorry, I'm not avoiding your question, but I think that first, that first step is really important. And it does link back to your point around, I guess, de-risking this approach. Once you've done that, so once that's in place, there's a couple of things to think about. So when you're approaching any bid, it's really, really important to look at the requirements in as much detail as possible. And again, you know, this is where clients will come to us because they struggle with this step in the process, because what tends to happen in most bidding processes is there is a lot of stuff to wade through. You know, there's a lot of information there around the requirements, the contractual obligations, you know, background on the client or the organisation that's awarding the work, and just getting through that stuff. There is an art and a science, I guess, to deconstructing the questions and the information that comes with any opportunity. But we always say to clients, if they're tackling that process on their own, just be really almost kind of, you know, you got to have a system of kind of really deconstructing that stuff, because it's really easy to miss something that will be material in the bid submission. So I think that's the first step. I think once you've got to that point, then, and you still know, you know, you kind of got your bid go no go process, and maybe it's passed all of the checks. You think, do you know what, this is a really good opportunity for us. You know, the next step is kind of building that bid content plan and thinking about what are the things. Don't jump straight into writing the response. It's important to look at, okay, you know, where do I need input? You know, if you're a small agency, you know, there's 2 or 3 of you, and we do work with some clients. We work with a couple of clients, and it's just, you know, there's 1 or 2 of them in the agency, and they bid for a fair amount of work. So you do have agencies of that size that approach bid processes. You know, if there's 1 or 2 of you, that's fairly simple. But if you're a bigger agency, you know, there's 30, 40 people in your organisation, you're going to need input from your technical people or your creative people. Engage those teams really early in the process. Once you've made the decision, don't wait, you know, 4 weeks down the line and then go to those teams and start asking them questions. So getting yourself in, and really that's about getting yourself into the best possible position, really, to start to write the bid response. And just coming back to that point I made a moment ago, you know, we'd always say the best way to approach this, start with a kickoff meeting. You know, get the right people in the room. It's like a pitch, isn't it? You know, an agency would do exactly the same for any pitch. They would start that process by going, right, who do we need around the table to look at this and think, right, how do we put forward the best possible proposition and proposal to win this work? There's no difference, really. I guess the difference between, you know, if we want to think about the difference between a pitch and a bid, in a bid, you're going to get a lot more detail, I would argue. I mean, some pitches may be different, but, you know, you're going to get a lot more specifics in terms of the questions that you've got to respond to. You know, and it's not unusual in a bid process to have 10, 15 questions, maybe as many as 20 questions that you've got to respond to. So being really systematic and clear about how you respond to those and making sure that you don't miss anything is critical in that first step, in that first phase. Sorry, I'm throwing a lot at you here, and we could probably spend another hour talking about how you actually approach the bid process. Maybe that's another one for another day. But I guess that just gives your listeners, I guess, a bit of a flavour of at least the start of the process.
No, love it. And it does really take me back. I mean, we did these all the time. We would often be responding to multiple bids. But, just to kind of, I guess, give listeners the scale, this is when I was working at agencies that had, well over, well, usually, over 100 staff. Sometimes we were a little bit smaller, sometimes they're a bit bigger. But on the whole, we had a team dedicated to this. So when I was new biz director, I would have 2 bid writers or a bid manager who would go and search for bids, be on all these platforms every day, getting the alerts, reading through them, qualifying whether she thought they were a good opportunity. We would then put that in front of the senior leadership team, and I would make my argument for whether we should go for it or not go for it, or usually not always go for it, because I wouldn't have taken it to them otherwise. And then, we had a bid library. We had because we did this all the time, we had a huge library. But at the scale of agency size that we could do it. I would say the agency that I am today and smaller agencies, it's going to be really hard to compete in this space, because it's going to take 2 or 3 of your team out to respond to it if you haven't got all this stuff prepared. Or would you say no? I mean, obviously they can come and use you, can't they, Alex? But
you teed that up perfectly, Katie. Well, no. I mean, look, this isn't a sales pitch, but that is why we exist. And I would challenge the perception that this is only a space for big agencies. We work with clients that we don't manage all of their bids. We work with a few agencies that've got a handful of people. I've got one client who is essentially a one person band, and he wins most of his work through bidding. So it's about finding the right opportunities, and I guess setting yourself up for success. And again, those principles won't be any different to when you're pitching for an RFP with a client directly, I guess, that isn't through a kind of a more formal procurement or bid process. I think it is, it's yes, there will be more pressures on smaller agencies because they haven't got the resources, that absolutely. But I guess that, in our experience, there are lots of agencies out there that are not, 40, 50, even 100 people, that are getting some real success in this space. So, but it's about finding the right opportunities, isn't it? And I guess tackling them the right way.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I've got a tough question to end on. Because, of course, the majority of what I talk about on this podcast and what I believe in and what my agency does is, really help agencies, MarTech businesses, other B2B businesses engage with an audience that should or could be their future clients. So marketing is paramount. We are the marketing solution to the sales problem, and we help all of our clients, no regard to any sector that they're in, build engagement with all of their prospects that potentially are going to be their future clients. How does that correlate, I guess, or how does that work alongside when you're bidding? Do you think that there is a benefit?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think one definitely feeds into the other, and there's some really, really practical points, I guess, here. So, for example, producing case studies and credentials and content that can be repurposed from bids. So some of the content that we see our clients producing and we work with our clients to produce, is stuff that we encourage them to reuse in their own marketing. Some of the case studies that are produced in bids will probably be some of the best work that they've done. And actually what we also find is that it just sits in the bid then. And, they just put it in their archive, and you might have experienced this, Katie, in previous lives. There's absolutely no reason that the agency can't reuse that content for other purposes, in other pitches, across their own wider communications activity. So I think there's a practical point there that actually the time that you invest in a bid process, I would say in every single bid, you're going to be asked to produce case studies. You will. It's a given. You're going to be asked to produce them. So why wouldn't you then reuse that content in other ways? So there's something there. I think one of the other things that we haven't really touched on, and it would be wrong of me not to talk about this, especially where public sector bidding is concerned. It's something called social value. And I know that we've spoken before outside of this podcast, and you're keen to explore this, further down the line. Social value is huge, and it might be a term that some of your listeners aren't necessarily familiar with. If it's effectively the same as the whole ESG space. Social value is just the terminology they use in the public sector, which is it's all around how within any publicly funded contract, a supplier has to demonstrate that they're going to give back and make a positive contribution to communities or the environment. So if, for example, I don't know, let's say a video content production agency won a contract with a local school, they would need to demonstrate how they're going to make a positive contribution to the students of that school, or college, let's say. University is probably a more realistic example. How they're going to make a positive contribution to the students at university under the contract if they were to win it. It was introduced about 10 years ago, and our view is that this is only going to become more and more important. But what's interesting is that, again, agencies might look at that and think, oh my God, I've not only have I got to invest time in the bid process, if I win it, I've then got to invest time in these social value initiatives. What we encourage our clients to do is think about, look at the positive benefits that can come off the back of that. So, lots of agencies, and I know you've talked a lot about this, about how are agencies tackling that kind of whole ESG agenda from a recruitment perspective in terms of, bringing on new team members. They need to demonstrate that, and this isn't just lip service, they need to demonstrate in a very real way that they are making a positive contribution to the communities they live and operate and work in, and the environment. And the work that you would deliver under a social value initiative is a great way to then, again, it'll have a wider positive impact on the agency. Does that make sense?
Totally. And something that we're seeing come up all the time when we speak to, CMOs, heads of procurement, time and time again. This isn't something that you're just, giving lip service anymore. This is real, guys. And this doesn't just go for, bidding, it's in every opportunity that you go for, specifically, and certainly if you want to start to work with larger businesses, larger brands. If you don't have your kind of purpose defined, and you're not giving back, and your values are not up to scratch, or you don't have any, they will go, because they have to. It's in their KPIs. They have to be seen to be working with agencies and partners that are proactively giving back and that have these values at their heart, whether that's D&I, around their diversity and inclusion, whether that is around recycling and climate change, whatever it might be. If you don't have any of that sorted, I promise you there'll be another agency that is in the same competitive space that you're bidding against or competing against that will have that, and they will choose them because they have to choose them, because they have to be seen within their business to be socially responsible.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think there is again, if an agency is considering going into that kind of world of bidding, social value is something they're going to have to proactively engage in. But there are wider benefits. If you're going to engage in that process and then you're going to deliver those initiatives, there's no reason why an agency then, and we work with some clients that are really good at this. They're proactive about it. They don't wait for the bid to come out to do it. They've already got their social value or ESG, whatever you want to call it, initiatives up and running. And so when they get to a bid process, they can already talk about them. So I think that's I suppose a really certainly given that COP27 is on the go. This is a really kind of timely point. About how does marketing and bidding kind of connect. I think it's a good one.
It's definitely, you're right. Developing really good case studies, whether that's video case studies and different approaches to case studying your work, making sure that you're tracking those results, making sure that you're entering the awards, that will really help in the bid space. So definitely, it's a different type of marketing, but something that we should all be doing. It's those kind of prove it pieces, and showing up and doing, what you said you're going to do, basically. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed it. You've really started to make me think, and I know a lot of my clients are going to find today's podcast really, really interesting, as well as hopefully lots of you lovely listeners as well. So I'm going to be sharing this with all of my clients when we publish. So yeah, big thank you for joining me today. And yeah, fingers crossed, there might be some collaboration opportunities here for us in the future as well.
Yeah, that'd be good. No, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Alex.
Cheers.
See, I told you. I mean, I tell you this every week, but wasn't that an awesome episode? Oh my goodness, it has inspired me to go and look at so much within my businesses. So I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. If you did enjoy it, please do go onto Apple Podcasts and give us a little 5-star review, leave your comments. And if you've got anything that you want to hear about on the podcast, feel free to pop me a little email, Katie, Katie, @street.agency. That's Katie, Katie, @street.agency. I hope you enjoyed today. I hope it's inspired you to take some action within your business. And I also hope that you're back with us again very, very soon.